After my father died, my husband and his brother took over the funeral and erased my name from every program. His mother said, "This isn't about you." I sat alone as they claimed my inheritance. But weeks later, during the will reading, the attorney revealed a clause that, "My name is Claire. I live in Roanoke, Virginia. I've been married to Greg for 14 years. We met at a friend's barbecue, and he was charming in that clean-cut, boy-next-door kind of way. He worked in IT, paid his taxes, didn't cheat, didn't hit, so I thought I was lucky. I didn't realize until much later that sometimes control doesn't come with shouting. It comes with silence, with ignoring your voice until you forget what it sounds like. My dad, Charlie, raised me alone after my mom died from breast cancer. I was 24 when she passed, and my dad and I became each other's world. He was a mail carrier, retired early with a modest pension, and spent most of his time gardening, reading history books, and keeping his 1995 Chevy truck running like new. We had a standing Sunday dinner. He never missed a birthday. He was steady. Greg tolerated my dad. That's the word, tolerated. He always had some small complaint after we visited. Why does he still keep all that junk? He's always giving you stuff like you're still a kid. Don't you think it's weird how much time you spend over there? I started visiting less, not because I wanted to, but because I got tired of the guilt trips. Greg's family didn't like my dad either, though they barely knew him. His mom, Barbara, called him old-fashioned, which was her code for doesn't kiss our ass. When my dad passed, I found him slumped over in his recliner, a half-eaten sandwich on his plate. I called 911. Then I sat on the floor next to him until they came. I don't remember much else from that day, except the cold. I told Greg. He said he was sorry and gave me this weak hug like it was something he was supposed to do. The next morning, I started planning the funeral. I called the church, the florist, the funeral home. I picked the songs, the casket, even wrote a short eulogy. Then Greg got involved. He told his brother Scott, who I never liked, and suddenly Scott was making calls. He called the funeral home and told them to send the program draft to him. I didn't even know that until I showed up and saw the printed copies. My name, his only daughter, was gone. No mention in the obituary. No space on the program. It looked like I didn't exist. When I told Greg, he shrugged and said, "Scott just streamlined it. It's not a big deal." When I told his mother, she said, "This isn't about you, Claire. Don't be selfish. Don't be selfish." My father was dead. They didn't even know him. I was being erased from the one thing I should have been front and center for. The funeral was unbearable. They took the first 2 rows for family, and I was told there weren't enough seats. I sat alone. Scott gave the eulogy. He called my father a quiet influence and said how grateful he was to welcome Charlie into our family. People I didn't recognize stood up and said scripted things that sounded like they were reading from a church bulletin. After the service, I stood outside while people hugged Greg and his mother. I don't think I made eye contact with anyone. I felt invisible. That night, I cried in the shower until the water went cold. A week passed. Then another. Greg started asking about the house. My dad's house. He said maybe we should consider renting it. Scott said he had a friend who was looking to buy. I told them nothing was happening until the will was read. Greg said, "We're just trying to help. You're not in a good headspace to handle this." That's when I got a call from Mr. Brenner, my dad's lawyer. He said we were scheduled for the reading next Thursday. I told Greg. He told Scott. They showed up in suits, all smiles, like they were about to collect a prize. But my father wasn't a fool. He had seen something, maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to add a clause to his will that changed everything. Enough to protect me when I was too blinded by loyalty to protect myself. When the will was read, and Mr. Brenner spoke those words about the house, the accounts, the trust, I didn't look at Greg. I didn't need to. I could feel the anger rolling off him. When Brenner said that Greg and Scott were left $1 each, I heard Scott scoff. Greg turned to me, his voice low. "You planned this." "No." I didn't. But my dad did. And in that moment, I realized I had one last chance to take my life back from Greg, from his family, from all the years I let them make me smaller. And that's exactly what I was going to do. After the will reading, things changed fast. Greg didn't talk to me on the drive home. He gripped the steering wheel like it had personally betrayed him. When we got inside, he went straight to the kitchen and cracked a beer. Then he stared at me like I was someone new, someone he couldn't control anymore. "So what now?" he said. "You gonna move into that house? Just leave me here?" I didn't answer right away. The truth was, I hadn't decided. I still slept beside this man every night. We'd built a life together, mortgage, bank accounts, routines. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while he snored beside me, I realized something. I didn't know him a damn thing anymore. The next morning, I called Mr. Brenner and told him to start the process of transferring the house into my name. I also asked about the retirement account. He said it would take a few weeks, but everything was clean. My father made sure of that. No loopholes, no way for Greg to contest it without losing what little he was left. That same day, Greg's mother showed up unannounced. She walked into my living room without knocking, holding a casserole dish like this was a family visit. I didn't say a word. She sat down, crossed her legs, and looked me dead in the eye. "Claire," she said, "I think we both know this situation isn't fair."
I ser det her.
"What situation?" She gave this soft, condescending smile. "You were upset, grieving. I understand that. But taking everything your father owned and freezing out the rest of the family, it just doesn't sit right." I laughed. I actually laughed. "The rest of the family? You people didn't even know him." She kept her tone calm, but her eyes turned sharp. "Greg's worked hard to give you a good life. You wouldn't even have time to care for that house without him. Think about how this looks, Claire. People talk." I stood up. "Then let them talk." That night, Greg asked if I was planning to cut him out of everything now. I told him I hadn't decided yet. That's when he started going through my things. I caught him snooping through my emails, asking weird questions about Mr. Brenner, even opening my mail. I started locking my documents in a drawer. He didn't like that. "You don't trust me anymore?" he asked. "No," I said. And then it got worse. Scott called me, drunk I think, left a voicemail that said, "Your dad was old. He didn't know what he was doing. We're not gonna let you take it all." I saved the voicemail. 2 days later, my car tires were slashed. The police said they couldn't prove who did it. Then I started noticing things missing, documents from the drawer, keys, even my laptop once. I confronted Greg. He denied everything. "You're paranoid," he said. "Grief does that." So, I made a choice. I moved out. I packed a single bag, took my father's spare keys, and drove to the house I grew up in. It was quiet, dusty, untouched. But it was mine. Greg showed up 3 days later. He stood on the porch, not knocking, just staring through the glass. "I just want to talk," he said. "We're married. This isn't how it's supposed to end." I locked the door. He came back twice more, once with Scott. The second time, I called the police. They left before anyone arrived. Then Greg filed for divorce. And here's where the real fight began. He claimed he was owed part of the inheritance as marital property. Said I had benefited from his support during our marriage and deserved to share any assets gained while we were together. He wanted the house, half of my dad's retirement, and, get this, compensation for emotional distress because he'd been excluded from the grieving process. I wanted to scream. Instead, I handed everything to Mr. Brenner and got my own lawyer. A real one. She told me not to worry. The trust was airtight. The house had been in my father's name only. The codicil locked it down. But the divorce case would drag. Greg wasn't letting go without a fight. So I prepared. I pulled bank records, emails, texts. I saved voicemails. I made copies of everything. I even found an old email from my dad, written 6 months before he died. He wrote, "If anything ever happens, don't let those people tell you who you are. You know better." And I did. But I also knew I wasn't done. They tried to erase me. They tried to take what was mine. They thought I'd be too broken to fight back. They were wrong. I wasn't just going to protect what was mine. I was going to make them regret ever crossing me. The divorce dragged on for months. Greg wasn't trying to win. He was trying to exhaust me. His lawyer filed motion after motion, demanding discovery on things that had nothing to do with our marriage. Old gifts my dad had given me, financial help from years back, even holiday checks. He tried to frame them as shared marital assets. It was never about fairness. It was about control. But I had time now. I wasn't working full-time. I'd taken a leave of absence from the clinic where I worked as a dental assistant, and I poured every minute into documenting what Greg had done. I found emails, not just from Greg but from his mother and Scott. The ones that made my blood run cold were sent in the weeks before my dad died. They were joking about the funeral, actual jokes. Claire's gonna be a wreck. We better take the reins now, or she'll have him buried in flannel and toolboxes. We'll make it a proper family event. Her name doesn't need to be on everything. Proper family? I printed them out, sent copies to my lawyer. But the real twist came when Mr. Brenner asked if I wanted to review the safe deposit box at the bank. My dad had left access instructions with him, but only for after the will had been executed. Inside, I found letters. 5 of them. All handwritten, dated over the last 2 years. All addressed to me. Each one detailed what my father had noticed, how Greg spoke to me, how distant I became, how I laughed less when he was around. In one letter, he wrote about overhearing Greg and Barbara talking in the kitchen during a Thanksgiving visit. She said you'd be set for life once I passed. Greg said he hoped I'd make it easy. Claire, I know you love him, but love doesn't ignore this kind of talk. He was right. And I had ignored it. The last letter wasn't just personal. It included a list of items in the house that I'd forgotten existed. One stood out, a backup hard drive in the safe under the stairs. I found it, plugged it in. What I saw made my hands shake. There were videos, old home movies, sure, but one folder was labeled, Recordings Claire. I clicked it, and there, clear as day, was a recording from a year prior. My dad had installed a security camera in his garage after a break-in on his block. But this footage wasn't of a break-in. It was Greg and Scott arguing. Scott, you need to get that house signed over before he dies. Greg, I'm working on it. She's getting suspicious. Scott, then stop letting her go over there so much. He's not senile yet. Greg, I can't push too hard or she'll blow. I just need him to sign a power of attorney or something. Then we can sell it. I couldn't breathe. They had been planning this. It wasn't just disrespect. It was a long con. They were waiting for my father to die so they could scoop up his house, his accounts, my entire inheritance. Greg didn't just erase me from the funeral. He tried to erase my father's wishes, his life, our relationship. I copied the video, sent it to my lawyer. And then I waited. I didn't tell Greg what I had. I let him keep digging, keep lying, keep posturing in court. Until the day came when I played the video for his attorney. In mediation, Greg's face turned white. Scott's voicemail, the emails, the footage, the letters. My lawyer dropped them all on the table, like dominoes lined up to fall. Greg looked at me and said, for the first time in our whole marriage, I didn't think you'd actually fight back. I smiled. I didn't think you'd be so easy to beat. And I wasn't done yet. Because now I had enough for something bigger than a divorce settlement. I had grounds for fraud. And the Attorney General's office was very interested in talking to me. After the mediation, things moved fast. Greg's lawyer dropped him 2 weeks later. Officially, it was irreconcilable differences in approach, but we all knew the truth. No lawyer wants to be dragged into a fraud case tied to forged legal documents and recorded schemes. Scott panicked first. I know this because he started calling me. He left voicemails trying to spin the video as taken out of context. He even offered to testify against Greg, said he'd admit to everything if I agreed not to press charges against him. But this wasn't about forgiveness. This wasn't about deals. This was about making them live with what they'd done. My lawyer submitted a formal complaint to the state bar regarding the attempt to manipulate estate access before my father's death. I also filed for a civil suit for attempted estate fraud, emotional distress, and tampering with inheritance. Then I made one more call to the local paper. I didn't give my name, not at first, but I told them I had evidence of a man trying to steal his dying father-in-law's home out from under his grieving wife, that there were emails, voicemails, and even a video. And I told them I'd provide everything on the record when the case was filed. 3 days later, a small column appeared in the local section. It didn't name names, just hinted at the case. But Roanoke isn't that big. People figured it out fast. Greg lost his job within a week. The IT firm said it was due to internal restructuring. I know better. They didn't want his name connected to anything in the press. Barbara showed up at my doorstep one more time. This time, she wasn't smiling. Her makeup looked caked on, like she hadn't slept. Her hair was flat. She was shaking. "You're destroying our family," she said. "No," I said. "Your family tried to destroy me. I'm just not letting it happen." She didn't have a response. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the driveway like little nails being hammered into a coffin. And still, I hadn't pulled the final trigger. The lawsuit was in motion. The trust was untouched, safe. I lived in my father's house now, sleeping in his old bed, surrounded by the quiet he always loved. But I kept thinking about that video, about how close I came to losing everything, and how Greg had looked at me all those years, knowing what he was planning. So I started digging further. I pulled our old joint tax returns, looked at bank statements, found small wire transfers, $1, $500 here, $2,000 there, made out to Scott's consulting business, which didn't exist. They'd been funneling money to each other, probably as practice for a bigger grab. Then I found the draft of a power of attorney document on Greg's computer, dated 6 months before my dad died. It had a fake signature. They had tried to forge it. They were going to move on the house before he even passed. That changed everything. Because now, we weren't just talking about manipulation. We were talking about forgery, fraud, a felony. And I had every piece of evidence I needed. What they took from me wasn't just about property. It was dignity. It was peace. It was the one moment in life where I should have been able to mourn, and they turned it into a performance.
A lie. But now?
Now I had the truth. And I was about to put it all in front of a judge. The courtroom was small, just a bland beige space with pew-style benches and old ceiling tiles. But it felt bigger than any church, any office, any funeral home I'd stepped into in the last year. Because this was where everything was going to be said out loud. Greg sat across from me, in a cheap suit, looking like a shell. Scott was behind him, arms crossed, trying to act tough. Barbara didn't show up. Maybe she couldn't bear to watch the house of lies she helped build fall apart. My lawyer laid everything out, methodically, calmly. She showed the judge the video, the emails, the bank statements, the phony power of attorney draft. She read from the letters my dad wrote. She played the voicemail from Scott where he said, "We're not going to let you take it all." Greg's new lawyer tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding. Said Greg had no real intent to defraud. That families have complex dynamics, and that maybe I had misinterpreted what they'd said or done. But the judge wasn't buying it. When it came time for my statement, I stood, and I told the court everything. How they erased me from my father's funeral. How I sat in the third row like a stranger. How they removed my name from the obituary, from the program, from the service. How they took what should have been the most painful but sacred moment of my life and made it feel like I didn't exist. Then I talked about the lies, the manipulation. The way they hovered like vultures before my dad's body was even cold. And how my father, quiet, observant, loving, saw them coming. How he tried to protect me, even in death. How his last act as my father was to make sure I still had a life. I could see Greg shrinking with every word. The judge ruled in my favor. Not just on the divorce, Greg got nothing.
No alimony.
No share of the trust. He was ordered to pay half of my legal fees. The estate fraud charges went to the DA for review, and with the video and document trail, the case was strong.
Scott was subpoenaed next.
He cracked under pressure. He admitted everything. Said he and Greg had talked hypothetically about getting the house early, that they didn't mean anything by it. But the email said otherwise. The money transfers. The forged document. Greg was arrested 2 months later on charges of attempted fraud, conspiracy, and forgery of a legal document. He ended up taking a plea deal to avoid jail, 3 years probation, a criminal record, and a public apology read in court. It didn't bring my father back, but it brought something else.
Peace.
Real peace. I moved fully into my father's house. I restored the garden he loved. I framed his letters and hung them in my bedroom. I kept his tools, his truck, even his old recliner. And I started speaking at estate planning seminars, telling my story, warning others about what can happen when you trust the wrong people. The final blow came 6 months later. The newspaper ran a follow-up. Daughter wins legal battle after husband. Brother-in-law conspire to seize inheritance. Greg's name was in bold.
So was Scott's.
Their reputations?
Gone.
Their careers? Over. Their smug, condescending family pride?
Shattered.
And me? I wasn't broken anymore. I was free. My name is Claire Ellis. And no one erases me again.